So our well, we are Mizzou Together. That's the name of our campaign. It's all about bringing the communities at Mizzou together. And the way that we do that is through our 3 pillars: serve, challenge, and belong. Serve is about optimizing MSA's resources as well as the university's resources to make sure that every dollar is spent transparently and efficiently and accountably. Challenge is about challenging the administration, the city, and the state to make sure that the student interest is kept in their minds. And belong is about using sociocultural leadership that MSA gives to foster a culture of inclusivity and belonging on campus.
I think one of the most important things is making sure that all of the students' voices are heard, which is, you can see kind of all throughout the platform, but especially in that challenge pillar, giving voices to students that don't have it, and really working to make Mizzou the best it can for as many students as possible.
Because over 30% of the undergraduate population is Greek, and if I'm supposed to represent all 27,000 students, and if Heather's supposed to represent all 27,000 students, we can't ignore the concerns of that population. Whether they're technically on campus or not, that area is heavily traversed by students, and thus we need to keep their interests in mind as well.
And as far as accessibility to being involved in Greek life, I know that's a huge deterrent, especially for women going through PHA formal recruitment. If you're in a wheelchair or have limited mobility, it's so hard to navigate those streets during recruitment, and that makes a huge portion of our involvement inaccessible to a lot of students. And that's just, I mean, it's not on campus, but it's still a part of Mizzou's community.
Yeah, we can't ignore them. Infrastructure, so repaving the roads and then taking care of the sidewalks. The City of Columbia and the university have a weird dynamic when it comes to who should be maintaining sidewalks. The people who have the sidewalks in their yards typically say that it's the city's responsibility. The city says, no, it's your responsibility. And it's almost this weird shared governance that leads to sidewalks just never getting fixed. So sidewalks are really big because some of these sidewalks have not been renovated since the 60s. Additionally, there's some incidental things, such as on Richmond Avenue, there's just this street pole in the middle of the sidewalk, and it's ludicrous because that sidewalk, at least that portion of it, is completely inaccessible. If, say, you were in a wheelchair, you'd have to go off the sidewalk to get around the pole. And so changing things like that would be a priority.
So as far as Greek recruitment, that's a really complicated question. I think it's just pushing leaders in the Greek community to set the standard of Greek life being inclusive. There's no way to force them to recruit more diversely, but as far as if you create that culture that's more accepting and a culture of inclusiveness, then that kind of trickles down into recruitment.
It depends on what the price tag the university gives us would be. I don't think MSA has made this a huge priority, at least not in the past. And so the first step in fixing this is to advocate for it so that it's higher up on the university's list of priorities. And then talking to people like Gary Ward, the Vice Chancellor of Operations, to get a price tag and a good assessment of what needs to be done with the counseling center. That's where you'll find the answer to that question.
Yeah, and I think it has to evaluate, okay, why is there this huge wait time for students? Why are we seeing all these issues with them being able to handle the vast amounts of students needing these services? And I think it's been, the fact that we don't even know approximately how much that would cost just shows how little we've looked into this up until now. So I think it's important to figure out what services aren't being utilized, what could be utilized better, including behavioral health in that as well. I think that's one thing we keep forgetting when we're talking about this in the debates and whatnot, is that the counseling center is there, but MU behavioral health is also there for students. So maybe the best route to take is focusing on behavioral health instead of the counseling center, kind of whichever one. We just want to maximize what the students can get.
Well, MSA can't cut the university's funding to that center, but we would push for more net funding to go to that center. If that means the university has to reallocate from somewhere else, then we'd be involved in those discussions as well. But in terms of a specific reallocation, that's something that we can really only answer once it's on the table and we understand the specifics of where the money is coming from.
Yeah, that's why it might be important to look into behavioral health, because that's also through the hospital, which is slightly less Mizzou affiliated, where the counseling center is more a service through primarily the university. That funding might be a little bit easier to come by if it's more associated with the hospital. I don't know all about healthcare, so that would definitely take a ton of research and sitting down with the people in charge, but just figuring out kind of what's best.
Sure. So this is an idea that I was able to pull from the SEC exchange, which was a trip that MSA went on to meet with all the other student governments in the SEC to kind of exchange notes and see what works for certain student governments. And one thing that really stole the show was certain universities purchased a Safe Walk app where the actual purchase isn't the use of the app, but the infrastructure of maintaining information that comes from the app given to the local police department. Mm-hmm. That's where the biggest price tag comes from. I think that if people feel uncomfortable walking around at night, a very smart way to at least somewhat address that issue is to make it so that there is a utility of safety just right on their phone that connects them with the police department if something goes wrong. We don't currently have something like that in a partnership with MUPD or CPD, so that's where the idea comes from. That's where it would fit in. In terms of the price tag, it depends on which vendor we go to. The former MSA president from 2 years ago, Nick Dregge, is one of the co-founders of SafeTrek, which is a Safe Walk app. We might look into that, but there are tons of other vendors as well. Yeah,
and the cool things about those is it doesn't just put a Band-Aid on the problem of campus safety, but like you said, those apps work with the police department where you can see where problem areas on campus are. So if a lot of students are having issues in this particular part of East Campus, then the police department can work with MUPD and leaders on campus to make those parts of campus more safe, so it starts to fix the problem as well. So it's, yes, an investment in safety, but it's also an investment in fixing problems that we've got here on campus.
Yeah, and I sat down with the head of MUPD, and we talked about how their policing model works, and he told me that it's basically a community policing model. They don't have as many people on staff as they'd like, and they depend on information from the students. Whenever there's a clarity release, they always have that number that you should call whenever you need to report something. I think this is the inclusion of this app in their community policing model would make campus much safer because they'd be getting better data. Yeah. So the resounding thing was that it was utilized. The school that I talked to, I can't remember, I'm pretty sure it was the University of South Carolina, but I'm not 100% sure on it. The trip was a while ago. But they phased in their app, in the usage of their app, and so they were, I think, a year into it, and they had a 10% usership of their entire student body using the app regularly, which I think is a very good start, and they said that their numbers were growing. Additionally, the model that they worked with was that if one school in their state purchased the app from a certain vendor, that same vendor would allow the app to be purchased by another school in the state for a reduced cost, and in order to kind of just facilitate the app spreading around. So this might even be something that we work with UMSL and UMKC with to see if we can get buy-in from them and perhaps share the costs. It's a big project. It's something that we'd lobby the university heavily for, and it's something very long-term. But to say that we shouldn't investigate this, at least, would be, I think, doing the student body a disservice, because campus safety is very important.
I think for me, kind of the strategy I take this is that if we create a more inclusive campus and we create a safer campus environment, that rolls over in our attention and academic success. Not that should the opportunity for, furthering a partnership with the Student Success Center and things like that, if that came up with us and that was something that we could tag along on, we wouldn't do it. But I think that a lot of those issues you see, targeting mental health, if the mental health of our campus is starting to be on the uptick, then grades are as well. I know the Student Success Center is doing a huge push right now to kind of co-program with the, excuse me, social justice centers and the Disability Center and the GOBCC because they realize that making campus safe for students has a huge impact on academics. And I think that's kind of the model we're following as well. That there's only so much we can do about what's actually happening in the classroom as MSA because there's people getting paid a lot more than us to do that job. But working to what we can do to make students feel safer, more involved, more connected on campus has a huge impact on grades.
In terms of like the direct policies that MSA can advocate for pertaining to academic success, that's something I think is better suited for the Academic Affairs Committee in the Senate. Tori Schaefer, who's one of my good friends, we served in Senate together, she's been working very hard in making sure things such as the MSA list, which is a course list that MSA put together of courses that are underutilized, or I guess under-enrolled, gets out there. She's been working to make sure that the religious observance policy that was passed in Senate last year is something that will be put into the syllabi of all classes. Those specific things I think are better left for the Academic Affairs Committee because they're very effective. Heather and I want to target the indirect causes of academic, not failure, but hindrances. Because those things are very tough to address and oftentimes they're very unseen. And they're very important because we might not understand that, say, the depression that I face or Heather may face can slow us down academically. Mm-hmm. So my platform is very advocacy focused, and I do mention the City of Columbia quite a lot, and that's because I effectively was the municipal lobbyist for MSA, and I've worked with the mayor and all the city council people for a very long time. I understand the value of city relations. MSA typically doesn't explore city relations at all, but they have such a profound impact on what happens on and around campus that it's a shame that we haven't engaged with the city more often than we recently started to do so. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the MSA president being, along with the campus community relations chair in the Senate, being a chief advocate for the student body at the city level, because I honestly think that MSA is the only organization in Columbia that can fill city halls at the snap of a finger. And that's very powerful. Additionally, some of the more miscellaneous projects that I worked on in Senate gave me a lot of perspective on some of the other issues that may not have pertained to my position directly. So for example, getting the tour team to visit the basement of the Student Center, that's a project that, though necessarily doesn't fit into the Campus and Community Relations Committee agenda, it was a project that I worked on and helped initiate. It was one that was very successful, and I learned a lot about the resource centers and about the way that tour team functions through that. And so it's both my direct experience and then just the different things that I've interacted with that I think give me a pretty good resume for MSA president.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm most passionate about, I think, that I wanted to see on the platform was expanding the roles of the United Ambassadors Minority Student Recruitment Team. I was a United Ambassador my freshman year, and then I became a tour guide, and I got to see very up close kind of how admissions works. And we saw at some of the race relations meetings, some of the things that the administration talked about were programs they were implementing to recruit more underrepresented student groups here on campus. And they really weren't doing anything new. And that was really frustrating to me that was their response to all the racial tension on campus was to just tell everybody what they're already doing. And I got to kind of question some of the admissions reps about what they were doing and if they thought that was enough. And finally, I got some direct answers from them that they weren't doing anything new and didn't plan on that. And I came from a high school that was way more racially and socioeconomically diverse, and it did so much to enrich my education in high school, and then I came to Mizzou, and it was far less like that. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, pushing the admissions office and the administration just to see more different types of people here on campus. Because I think that will solve some of the issues as far as inclusion, but also give students more of a voice and more comfort when they're around people that are like them, and campus isn't so whitewashed. I think what differentiates us most is that we want to instill practical action and practical allyship. I think it's really easy for people in positions of leadership to just say you're an ally and say we want to make the student voice heard, and it doesn't go much farther than social media campaigns. And I think, I don't know, there's so much talk about We need to hear what the students want, and I think to a certain extent, a lot of the race relations issues, they're protesting in our student center, they're protesting in Jesse Hall, like we're hearing what they want. And so why do we keep saying we need to listen more when student leaders are getting these vibes? Okay, well, let's start working with them practically and be action-oriented. I think that's what we're trying to focus on.
And another thing is that MSA kind of has this big brother mentality where we oftentimes, we don't consult the experts in the field, or we don't consult, I guess in this case, groups with marginalized identities. And we end up advocating on their behalf without actually getting the information that they need. MSA's role should be passing, not like being their voice necessarily, but giving them a microphone and connecting them with the people they need to connect and help facilitate whatever it is that they want. Additionally, Heather and I realized that the office of MSA president isn't just constrained by the office itself, that oftentimes the most important thing that the MSA president and VP can do is not push a resolution through Senate about standing in solidarity with a certain organization, but to march in their protests with them, to get to know their leaders, to make an effort to just organically understand the issues that they're going through. Because that relationship is vital, that information is vital, and I just don't see how the MSA president can be a sociocultural leader if they're not doing these types of things.
Yeah, we want to work with these student groups that feel underrepresented, not speak for them or solve all their problems on our own because we have the position of MSA president and vice president, but rather they're the experts in their own situation. And then also even partnering with those social justice centers, which are there with the students every day, hearing the problems on campus, and then using our resources and our power to aid them in what they're doing a little bit more practically, where they're doing the advocacy in the safer spaces and the education, and then we focus on how can we aid this and help this in more practical terms.
Yeah. A lot of what I think Peyton and Brenda have done is just speak out about things. Typically, the MSA president would be very afraid to speak on things such as race relations and sexual violence prevention because there's this idea that bad PR, that you'll get bad PR for it, or certain bridges will be burnt down. If that's the case, then Peyton certainly has been unafraid to do that, to just speak his heart and help contribute to giving a voice to those that don't have any on this campus. And so just being unafraid to speak out and be honest about the campus climate and the darker side of just being a student on campus is incredibly huge. I know that's not like a policy thing, but it's something that's very much needed in the office of president. So that's something we definitely want to continue, just keep being honest. I think as long as I've been here, this certainly hasn't existed, but a very strong relationship between the MSA exec and the MSA Senate. The reason why that relationship is important is because MSA senators are the ones that tend to go out in the field quite a lot and really understand what the students are going through. The projects that they're working on are often a very good reflection of what the student body wants. MSA exec should help facilitate their goals. That's why I'd work towards bringing the Department of Student Activities, the Department of Student Services, and the Department of Student Communications, and basically let them be resources for Senate to use. As a member of Senate myself, we had to handle all of our own programming. We had our own budget, and if we wanted to throw an event, we very rarely would have the opportunity to work with the Department of Student Activities, which has a $400,000 budget. Making sure that these departments are resources for Senate to use would enable Senate to better represent the opinion of the student body, and it would be building a bridge between Senate and exec. I know that's kind of like a nuanced, maybe MSA internals only type thing, but as someone who is in Senate and someone who is hoping to move towards exec, I can guarantee you that a strong relationship between these two institutions would make all the projects we're working on and all the things in our platform much easier to accomplish. And by doing that, we'd be serving the student body way better. So in the debate before, I believe certain candidates as well as myself, we both mentioned the term, "I recognized my privilege," just again and again and again, to the point where it felt like it was becoming a buzzword, in the sense that I'm sure many people remember a few years ago, diversity was like the buzzword for the year, where everybody was just talking about diversity, to the point where it sort of lost its meaning and its importance. And I feel like the term inclusivity is now going there too, which is unfortunate, because those two things are very different and they're very important. But if we keep talking about them in, I guess, just a fake manner, then they lose their value. And I feel like the term, "I recognize my privilege," has been used to just pander towards social justice groups, as opposed to actually being something substantive. And so I've kind of corrected for that since Monday, where when I do talk to, say, an organization that would classify itself as a social justice group, I'm actually upfront and honest about the fact that I have used the term, "I recognize my privilege," as something that is more of a political statement as opposed to something honest. In all honesty, sometimes the best thing MSA can do is just sit down with people and just listen to what they want, and then take that opinion and do the right thing with it. We oftentimes say that we're going to do this program or this program or this program without consulting the necessary people. And during the campaigns, when we're talking about stuff like that, it comes off as incredibly fake. MSA doesn't have all the answers for, say, what the Legion of Black Collegians may be suffering through. But the thing that we can best do is sit down with them and listen to them, and that can't happen without us being honest with them first.
Yeah, and as far as, like, I'm a sociology major, so I hear these things like recognizing privilege all the time. And like, it has to be action oriented. And we have to, it was frustrating to me also using the phrase, "I recognize my privilege," to cover up problematic things we've done in the past, where, I don't know, we just want to be honest that, like, yes, we perpetuate everything that's wrong on this campus. Like, we actively and inactively have perpetuated racism, sexism, rape culture. We are part of the problem, but we want to take active steps to correct that. And that's allyship. Allyship isn't just saying you're an ally. It isn't just saying, like, "Oh, I have privilege." Well, everyone knows you have privilege. Like, you don't have to tell the audience that I, as a white woman, have privilege. It's, what are you doing with that privilege? Like, acknowledging privilege is a first step. And someone with such power and that has been chosen by the students to run their student government, I think personally that a lot more should be expected out of you than just recognizing your privilege. It's using your privilege to do something good for people that don't have privilege. And that's where we wanted to hit it with honesty, that we can keep speaking in these really vague social justice terms so we never say anything problematic or offensive, and everyone thinks we're on the social justice side. And that's why Monday we really tried to come out and show that this is something we're passionate and serious about, and we're not going to fail our underrepresented groups on campus.
And one important thing is that, like, the term "I recognize my privilege" isn't just this, like, get out of jail free card, in the sense that, okay, you recognize your privilege, suddenly you're an ally. Like, the journey in becoming an ally, one, it starts with, yes, recognize your privilege, and then two, understanding where you have perpetuated these things, which is something that Heather and I have had long discussions about. And then three, it's just you educate yourself in a very humble way, in the sense that your education doesn't contribute to you being able to be the voice for a marginalized community. It contributes to you being able to listen and attempt to better understand a marginalized community, and help give them the microphone. You can't do any of those four things without being honest with yourself and honest with the people you talk about. And during an MSA presidential campaign, when the student body is deciding who's going to be the leader of the undergraduate student body, if there isn't an honest discussion, then all of the candidates are doing a disservice to the student body. And that's just starting out in office on the wrong foot, I'd say.
Yeah, and I don't even know that so much honesty is. I don't think anyone was on stage lying
Right.
so much as we weren't being candid.
Yeah.
We weren't being real with students, and I think that's so important because we are just students. Like, just because I'm running for this doesn't mean that I'm on, like, some weird platform or anything like that. When we're not candid and we're not real with students, then what's the point?
I started my journey, it's a tough question. There are times when I thought I started my journey, which was a long time ago, and I wasn't humble about it, and I definitely called myself an ally when I wasn't. And so that's, I think, when I started thinking about starting a journey and thought I was on a journey, but I really wasn't. To be frank, if I want to say I started my journey, it was just a few days ago, the weekend before this past weekend, when we really started thinking about what it means to be an ally. And I went through some experiences that made me realize that the first thing that I need to do if I want to, or if I aspire to be an ally, is to be humble. And that means admitting where I perpetuate the things that plague campus. And that was very tough, and it required a lot of honesty with myself. But that's where my journey began. It happened to be in the middle of the presidential race, but I'm glad it happened.
I guess for me, like I said, I grew up in a high school that was very different than a lot of places, very different than Mizzou, and very different than the way a lot of kids grew up. And so I was always very aware of race relations issues and things like that. I didn't really know what that meant in my life as far as like using my privilege and stuff. That wasn't things that I really like started to unpack until I came to college. And then actually during the whole thing going on with Ferguson, I remember being so like emotionally like distraught over the ruling that he wasn't going to go to trial. And I was tweeting about it a lot because why not? Like just go to Twitter. And I tweeted a lot of really honest things said out of emotion about just kind of my take on it. And people that I knew from Mizzou were so angry with me. Like people were like openly tweeting back about how like wrong I was and I just needed to stop talking. And I was just like, oh my God, like this is the space that I live in. Like I literally live at Mizzou where people like aren't even and like there's a lot of politics going into Ferguson and like that's not really the point. But I think it was the first time that I spoke out and I had the option to go back and delete the tweets. I had the option to go back and like, you know, say I was wrong or not bring it up, but I kind of just, ever since then, I've just made it my mission to keep talking about these things, even when it alienates people from me. And that, I think part of being an ally is making yourself really uncomfortable. And that's one thing we forget, is that we like kind of say we're an ally, but we're not willing to get out there beyond like a retweet here and there, or like, you know, maybe talking about it a little bit. But like true allyship, you have to be out there doing things that could be damaging to you. And that was a big thing for me, was kind of sacrificing a little bit of you know, social value, even where I'm sure there are people on this campus that hate the things I post on Facebook, that hate the conversations, hate when I check them when they're speaking in really ableist terms. But I'm by no means a perfect ally. I have so far to go. But I think that was kind of the beginning of that journey, was like starting to make myself uncomfortable and speak out on things when it would be easier just to be silent.
That's why Peyton's Facebook post was so admirable, because it very clearly could have burned bridges for him. But he was deciding to just be honest about his experiences, and I think that's why it went viral. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think weekly meetings with the chancellor is a good idea. Making sure that the administration and MSA are on the same page, which they generally aren't, but I think a weekly meeting will definitely help them be on the same page.
Yeah.
I think so the advantage that MSA always has above, I think, honestly, the single thing that MSA will always trump the university in is that we are the students, and so we're experiencing like student issues. And the administration's kind of at a point of privilege when it comes to student issues, because they're not students, and so they can't actually experience the things that we're going through. And so we will always be more in tune with the climate on campus. We'll always be more in tune with what's going on. And chances are we'll get the information about a student issue before the administration will. And so using that information, that's kind of like allows us to kind of keep our cards close to our heart. Additionally, if the administration does do things that aren't good to the student body, MSA president has the ability to shore up a lot of grassroots support against the actions of the university. Using that grassroots support just very simply creates a problem for the university because they worry about their PR quite a lot. And so using that against them is a pretty good organic way to keep them accountable.
And I think practically, I'm in training to be a diversity peer educator right now, and so I'm kind of learning about how to start unpacking like these ideas of privilege with people that are like completely adamant against like wanting to learn, and like if I can use those skills on Chancellor Lofton, like to make him see that like these issues and like there's a lot going into his job that's so much bigger than race relations in some ways, but somehow making him unpack that these issues aren't just PR issues, like they are issues that matter. They're like, your duty as a human to care about these things, and your duty as someone who, 35,000 students are in your care. And I think that's important that we as an administration, like he's not getting rid of Peyton and getting rid of the problem, like should we be elected, like he just let a far bigger problem into his office. Yeah. And that's my goal, is to be pretty, like obviously like professional and keeping a good working relationship with him, but we're not gonna back down.
Yeah, we're not gonna be afraid of what he tries to do. We're all about bringing communities together. I know that's kind of cliche. I think like in my time at Mizzou, there have been at least 2 Unite Mizzou campaigns, like during the presidential election year, but we're not operating under the assumption that Mizzou already is united. We're not operating under the assumption of any type of colorblindness. We're not operating under the assumption that the community isn't fragmented. We do think that it is. But the only way that I think that the student voice can be properly represented to the administration is if all students are on a united front. And so I think MSA has some homework to do about how we can bring leaders in all the different communities on campus into the same room, have us roll up our sleeves and figure out what to do. Because we're only here for 4, maybe 5 years as students, and MSA president's only in term for 1 year. And so administration could always wait till our term is out or wait till this generation of students graduate, which is why in the short amount of time that we have to be tactful and visceral in our approach. And that requires a lot of support from everyone. That's what our campaign is about, and that's the #1 thing that we want to do when we're in office, is bring communities together so we can properly advocate the student interest to the administration.
I can't think of anything. This feels like an interview where you should ask another question.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I don't know.
I really can't think of anything. No, you hit some stuff in our platform that we haven't gotten to talk about yet, so I feel pretty good about it.
That was exciting.
That was kind of the goal.
Yeah, no, that was nice. I was like, yeah, that is on our platform.
Oh, I guess one thing to add is that like advocating the student interest of the state is a very important thing. I think that often gets left out of the discussion, or if it is included in the discussion, it's very complicated and very difficult to unpack. We tried to unpack a little bit of it in the previous debate. It was very difficult for people to do so because it's incredibly complicated. But I have experience working with the state legislature. I worked in the state legislature for 2 years, specifically on higher education funding. So state level advocacy is very close to me, and I cannot wait to go back to Jeff City to learn some people about what MSA can do down there. So
yeah, I think as far as that, things I'd want students to understand, like how much our strengths and weaknesses really kind of balance each other. We're both not, like there was no question like who was going to be president, who was going to be vice president, who had the right skills, because so much of like what Syed's really amazing at doing, I don't have as much experience in, and then I kind of brought my own talents and strengths in, and they really complement each other, and I think that's super important, that we're going to get those practical things done. We're going to be down in Jeff City. We're going to be advocating for those things like, pedestrian safety and infrastructure, but then also social justice, which is where my sort of college involvement has been more focused on. That's going to be where I have a little bit more experience on, and with Greek life and all these things, that we all kind of have these complementing strengths that are going to go together to make sure, like we said, all students are represented. We can bring together those parts of campus and hopefully not just address one issue that's happening on campus, but a lot of them together.
Yeah. We're excited. I mean, should we get elected, we're excited for our term because we're going to be trying to tackle everything.